and thank you for joining our session. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on treaty territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place, and reaffirm our relationships with all the peoples for whom Canada is home. The theme for this session is becoming, but more specifically, it is becoming from the perspective of diversity and inclusion in law enforcement. Permit me to introduce myself. My name is Danylo Puderak, and the thread that ties me to becoming is that of being the son and grandson of immigrant parents and grandparents who came to Canada in the 1940s and 1950s. My parents' story of coming to Canada from post-World War II Europe is complex, but not uncommon even today. As Ukrainian immigrants, they too faced discrimination. Like many of today's newcomers, they found support in their own ethnocultural communities. Growing up in Canada at that time, the pressure they felt to assimilate and to talk and act like Canadians was strong, and its impact was lasting. As adults, they felt the need to protect their children from similar intolerance by downplaying their Ukrainianness. For example, they did not teach their kids to speak Ukrainian. So it's somewhat ironic that their eldest son, namely me, would complete a university degree with a Ukrainian studies major, would spend time studying and working in Ukraine, and would become the executive director of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress of Saskatchewan, the role that I've held for the past 18 years. It's now my pleasure to introduce Troy Cooper, Chief of the Saskatoon Police Service. Chief Cooper, welcome to Threads 2022.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Our conference participants may have seen you either on TV or in person. You're a man about town and seen in many different places, but they might not know a lot about you, the person. And so who is Troy Cooper, and what is it that you'd like to share with the participants of today's conference?
Well, I guess I'll just tell a little bit about my history and my work history as well. So I grew up in Saskatchewan in a town in north central Saskatchewan called Big River. I wasn't actually in the town. We lived in, my children are often embarrassed when I say we lived in the bush, but we did. And the area where I grew up in didn't have, for example, telephone services till I was about 12 years old. So we were a little bit remote then at the time. It's not a remote community anymore, much more easily accessible. But we had a large family that lived in that area, and my parents fostered as well. So I have this incredibly large extended family all across the northern Saskatchewan, which is amazing. We had cultural connection to the Métis community. I belonged to the Big River Métis local, but similar to your story, Danylo, it was downplayed. The culture growing up was downplayed, and it wasn't until I think I policed in Prince Albert as a young man, where there was more exposure to culture there, and certainly through my friends and through my foster brothers and sisters, that I was exposed to both Métis and Cree culture. I have 5 children. I have 5 grandchildren, and 4 of them are members of the Takoot First Nation, so I've got ties to that community as well, and I'm very fortunate. And I have a degree in criminology and a master's of business administration, and I joined the Prince Albert Police Service in 1987, and policed there for much of my career. I was eventually the chief of police there before coming to Saskatoon 4 years ago, and now I'm the chief of police in Saskatoon.
And that ties into my next question, that it is 2022 marking 35 years for you in the police service. So can we go back to those early years when you were just starting out? And you had mentioned that growing up, there wasn't a lot of connection to your Métis ancestry or identity at the time, and that was really something that came about when you're in PA. But could you describe any challenges you might have faced as a Métis officer, or some of the other Métis First Nations officers that they may have faced entering and serving in law enforcement at that time? And were the expectations of you any different?
You know, I don't think that I was representative of a Métis person and some of the challenges a lot of the Métis community have faced, obviously. I've got privilege that over the course of time, I've become more and more aware of the different layers and levels of privilege that I do have. But what I witnessed with other officers, maybe just the environment that they were in, was that being Indigenous would have been a challenge for officers, I'm sure, generally speaking, but specifically to our industry. We have this paramilitary history where we have a uniform. So very literally, we expect uniformity. And so for somebody who was culturally connected, someone who through their culture, Indigenous culture or otherwise, if they were not uniform, if they were not the same as the rest of us, it would have been very challenging. So people who wore braids, for example, people who wore a turban, people who had a different worldview, those sorts of individuals would have had a difficult time fitting into the environment of policing for sure.
So what's changed since that time?
You know, a lot of things have changed. Actually, you know, even back in the early 90s, we had summer student programs for Indigenous staff. We had mandatory Cree language classes. There was early attempts at recruitment, you know, to make sure that we were reflecting the community. There were some of those things going on even then. They didn't have a lot of success in diversifying our force early on. And I think what's changed is an understanding that culture and diversity has value, not just as an obligation as a large employer. It has actual value in throughout the organization to make sure that we have diverse opinions, diverse points of view to solve some of the really unique challenges of policing. And so now we see culture not just as a recruitment initiative, but culture throughout justice, throughout policing. It's present. It's a systems sort of view of the value of it.
Those are important. That's very important changes. So could you share with us approximately what percentage of the Saskatoon Police Service now is Indigenous, or Inuit, or Métis, and also how has that changed over the past 5 years?
Yeah, so we actually measure that in certain categories that are provided to us through the Human Rights Commission, and so we just have one category of Indigenous, and that's intended, of course, to cover Inuit officers and First Nations officers, Métis officers, etc. But we capture that one data statistic, and we have overall our organization is around 9 to 10% Indigenous. Our frontline staff around 12.5%. And so we compare that to the community of around 10% in Saskatoon and the province around 14%. Our goal is 14%. We're roughly at 12.5%. And that's been fairly stable, to be honest, for the last 5 years, between 11 and 12% Indigenous officers.
So has it become easier then to attract Indigenous individuals into law enforcement?
I think some of those barriers that I talked about earlier, you know, someone who wears braids, someone who has a different worldview, those barriers are no longer as challenging as they once were. So in that aspect, it's become easier. But we're finding that we're not very good at recruiting. So we have, in the past, we waited for people to come to us. We just sort of assumed there was always going to be this large applicant pool, and now we find ourselves competing with other employers for people who are educated and fit and have good character, and so there's the shrinking applicant pool across the board. So
what are the barriers that you're seeing, you know, internally and externally for recruitment?
Yeah, there's still some systemic barriers there. I think. You know, you look, for example, at the definition of family, who it is that would qualify in our, you know, for compassionate leave as a family member. That might be different from one culture to another. And so we've got this colonial view of what those sorts of things look like. So there's still some systemic issues there for sure. But again, it's, another structural issue, for example, is our entrance exam. There's a lot of English language, English grammar built into that as well. And so we do our best to try and build value for culture into that process, but there's still some structural issues to deal with.
What about attitudes within Indigenous communities towards the police service?
You know, we measure that actually within Saskatoon to see what does the community think about the police service? Are you confident in the service that you're getting, and are you satisfied with the police? And we have really high satisfaction ratings even within the Indigenous communities here. I find that with recruitment, once we have somebody selected, and they come into our organization. They assimilate with everyone well. Even as individuals, they're accepted for who they are. We don't have a lot of issue with retention. It's a matter of selection and recruitment where our challengers are.
All right. So in light of Canada's ongoing struggle with walking the path of truth and reconciliation, and you've talked about this, some of the barriers that are either or could be perceived as systemic racism. What might some of those be?
Yeah, I touched on that just briefly. I think that colonial mindset of our structure. We're still a paramilitary organization, right? We still have that reputation, and so if you are somebody who values community-based programs or community-focused health and help and safety. When you see the police, if we're so busy that we're just going call to call and we're acting like the military, that's not very appealing. We try our best to build community-based police models, but when we're busy, when things are challenging for us, people don't see that.
Right.
And if they don't see community-based policing models, they might not be attracted to our structure.
Okay, thank you. In recent years, immigration to Saskatchewan has expanded dramatically. We've seen that particularly over the past decade or so. And the face of diversity in our province is becoming more reflective as the world as a whole. From the standpoint of policing and law enforcement, how prepared is Saskatoon Police Service to serve and engage those newcomers?
I think we do a pretty good job of addressing the education needs of newcomers. We have an equity and cultural engagement unit that does our best, I think, to be aware of who it is that's making up the community, and which is really important because people arrive in Canada with not with a blank slate. They come with some previous experience about police and safety, and we have to understand that. So we not only have to educate them about the community and safety, but we have to listen to them to understand what it was what are they facing, what is it that they need from the police as well. But we do have staff and strategies to address that I think are working well.
And it's at a very practical level that when you have newcomers coming from countries where that relationship with the police is very antagonistic or one of fear, there's those attitudes that you need to overcome. Even simple things like, I'll give you an example, newcomers from Ukraine, they would be used to getting pulled over and you need to get out of the car. And then the police officer approaches you, where here you're supposed to stay in the car, right?
Right.
So,
and it's important not only that we're educated, but that our officers understand those experiences. We're not just there to talk to the newcomer community and tell them the standards here, but we need to understand where they're coming from as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
So a similar question to the recruitment of Indigenous. What percentage of active duty officers in SPS would be newcomers?
So we don't, when we capture that data, and we're trying to do a better job of breaking down categories, but the human rights categories, recruitment priorities that we have are gender, so female officers, and then visible minorities, so Indigenous and visible minorities. And so from newcomer populations, you don't always have them as visible minorities. So we have officers from South Africa, from England, from Italy, and places where they might not be considered visible minorities. So they're not included in our count of that category. We also have visible minorities who are third-generation Canadians. There might be a black officer, but they're the third generation in Canada. So they're not. They are captured in there, but they're not newcomers. So it's difficult. But we have about 6% of our staff, our frontline supervisors and frontline officers, are visible minorities, and so we do have people from, Mauritius and China and India on staff, and we just haven't broken those down. That's a category that has increased, and it's an area of success for us. We were at about 4% 5 years ago. We're at 6%, and our increase in targeting recruitment from those diverse communities has been our most successful initiative around recruitment lately.
Well, that's great. And so could you share with us some of the steps that are being taken to prepare and evolve our police service to better reflect the changing cultural environment?
Yeah, I think, we first of all, we offer some supports prior to recruitment. And so we have officers who are Indigenous recruitment officers only, for example, or we have an equity and cultural engagement unit that's going to be able to provide support and advice for new Canadians who might want to be interested in policing. We have supports there, I think, for them. We also recognize diversity as value throughout the organization. So it's not that we are going out and looking for people just simply because we have these targeted recruitment goals, but because we need them in our organization to be better. And just that mindset, I think, is important. We have a policy level position that we've created, someone at an executive level that will be able to look at how, right from recruitment on to all of our police practices, how is our response to the community being felt by the community? So we need to know who's in the community, we need to know what their histories and their stories are, and how we're interacting well with them. So I think we're paying a lot of attention, and we certainly recognize the value of that population.
What about something like language? So encouraging people, even officers that are currently with active duty, to learn languages.
Yeah, we have, we've got a long list of different languages that are already spoken by officers. We support secondary education. We've got a great translator program as well. It's amazing that the different languages that are spoken by our staff. We're very proud of that for sure. But as you're right, I think it's important that staff see that that's valuable, and certainly even in investigations, we see the value of that through our translator program, but that is something we're proud of.
Oh, great. So 2021 marked the 50th anniversary of Canada's multiculturalism, and it was in 1971 that then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau announced that Canada would officially adopt a policy of multiculturalism. This was enshrined in the Canadian Constitution in 1982. Could you explain, Chief Cooper, what does multiculturalism mean to you?
We just sort of led into that with some discussion about language and the celebration of language, the celebration of differences. And so for me, I think multiculturalism is not just the presence of people from different backgrounds and cultures, but the obligation to make sure that they have a safe space to be, and that they are supported, so that there's any obstacles that are created by our community for them to fully participate in Saskatoon as citizens are removed. And I think we all, certainly as a police organization or as a public safety organization, we have that obligation, but I think as citizens we have that as well. Creating that safe space ties into to my next question here. And unfortunately, in the past couple of years in Saskatoon, there's been reports of hate attacks on citizens, and due to their ethnic, their sexual identity, or their religious identities. And so, what's the role of Saskatoon Police Service in ensuring that all citizens, no matter their identity, can not only feel safe, but actually are safe on the streets and the parks and all neighborhoods of Saskatoon? Yeah, those are two different topics, right? The being safe and then the feeling safe. Right. And so being safe in Saskatoon, we've seen crime actually decrease over the last decade. And you wouldn't suspect that when you see the news and you watch social media. There is a real fear in the community often that's based on experiences in other places in the world, or in other places in Canada, or even other places in Saskatchewan. But I think the point is that we need to be honest about what's happening in the community, so people will know that if there's something that's creating a danger, the police will advise the community. And we do that through our social media, our public affairs section, but also through our relationships with the different cultural leaders and different cultural groups. So people know, they might not trust the police, they might not know the police, they might not know how to feel about the police, but if they see the police officer in a strong relationship, an authentic relationship with someone who's important within that community, they can trust that person. And so we will have a better understanding of what's actually occurring. So we do strong enforcement, absolutely no tolerance for hate, for bigotry, for racist acts, for crimes that are associated with that. We understand we're not overlooking or ignoring the harm that's done from things like white nationalism. We're connected very strongly across Canada in an intelligence community, so that we can be prepared to tell the community when there is a threat. And I have the honor of serving on the Saskatoon Police Service Diversity Committee, Advisory Committee, and it's always very
I always leave those meetings with a really positive feeling, particularly when I hear about if there's an issue that arises and how you or some of your leadership will engage with certain communities when there's questions of Islamophobia that have come up in the media or in the community, and you reach out to those communities to let them know that they have, the support and the concerns of the SPS, or with the Every Child Matters.
Right.
You're there marching and participating. Your officers are there, so that's really appreciated, and I think does a lot to help build that relationship with all communities.
We have a mission statement for the police service, and it begins with the statement, as part of the community. So we changed that statement just recently to say that, because we wanted people to understand, including our own staff, to understand that we are not something that's applied to the community. We're not a force that's present, that's applied, some external force. We're your neighbors. Mm-hmm. We're your hockey coaches and your babysitters, and so we care about the community for the same reasons that everyone else cares about the community, and I think that's important.
Very much. So the Saskatchewan Police Service motto, "Be the difference." Right. Chief Cooper, what is that message? What message do you want to send to our Threads listeners about how we can all be the difference in our community?
Yeah, I think that's the point, is that we're all responsible for things like community safety. Our service, our community, is diverse, and it's strong and beautiful and wonderful and healthy because of that diversity. And it's not up to somebody else to go out and learn about your neighbor and develop some kind of understanding of the history of where everybody else comes from. That's up to us as individuals. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we know about each other, the stronger our social fabric is going to be, which means we'll have a healthier, safer community to live in.
Yes. Thank you, Chief Cooper. I always appreciate hearing your insight and your dedication to making our city a safer and more inclusive place to live. As we wrap up our session, for those people that may be considering a career in Saskatchewan Police Service, could you tell them how can they get more information?
Absolutely. So first of all, best job in the world. Second of all, every police officer will be able to provide some information, see somebody, talk to them. But we do have a website that has information on there. If you call the office, we've got recruiting officers as well that will speak to you or get back to you. So we're very easy to contact. The process is incredibly smooth, and we're looking forward to a lot of people who are listening reaching out to us for a career in policing. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being with us
pleasure.
today,
Thank you.
and thank you for joining us.